What is the craziest case of rich people problems you've seen? My neighbor called the police on me because I was devaluing the neighborhood aesthetic with my car. I had just moved into what I thought was a nice suburban community, nothing too fancy, but definitely an upgrade from my previous apartment. The house was at the lower end of the price range for the area, but it was all I could afford as a single dad working as a high school teacher. Everything seemed fine for the first week until I came home one evening to find a note on my windshield. It read, "Your vehicle is an eyesore. Please park it in your garage or elsewhere." I drove a perfectly functional 10-year-old Honda Civic. It wasn't brand new, but it was clean and well maintained. I didn't have a garage since my unit only came with a carport, and street parking was completely legal. I ignored the note and went about my life. 3 days later, I received a more strongly worded letter in my mailbox from someone identifying themselves as the neighborhood beautification coordinator, stating that my lower tier vehicle was bringing down property values and requesting I park it somewhere not visible from the main road. I still had no idea who was behind these notes, so I just laughed it off and continued parking in my own designated spot. The following weekend, I was grading papers when there was a knock at my door. It was a police officer asking if I was the owner of the Honda Civic. Confused, I confirmed that I was. The officer explained that they'd received a complaint about an abandoned vehicle that was causing distress to residents. I invited the officer to inspect my perfectly normal car, which was clearly not abandoned since I drove it every day. The officer seemed embarrassed and apologized for the call out. As he was leaving, my next-door neighbor Margaret, who I'd never spoken to before, came storming out of her house. She was in her 50s, dripping in jewelry, and looked furious. She started loudly explaining to the officer that the homeowners association had standards and that my junk car was visible from her breakfast nook and ruining her morning ambiance. The officer tried to explain that there was nothing illegal about my car, but she kept interrupting him. Finally, she turned to me and said, "Do you know what it's like to look at something so depressing every day? My therapist says it's triggering my anxiety." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The officer finally told her that this wasn't a police matter and left. The next day, I received a formal letter from the HOA. Turns out there was no actual rule against older vehicles, but Margaret was the president and was trying to implement a new bylaw requiring all vehicles in the neighborhood to be less than 5 years old. When that failed to get enough votes, she began leaving notes on other substandard cars too. The situation came to a head at the next HOA meeting, where Margaret dramatically presented a PowerPoint showing how property values could theoretically drop by 0.5% due to visual pollutants like my Honda. Several neighbors actually defended me, pointing out that Margaret had recently thrown a fit when someone's pool maintenance crew arrived at 7:30 a.m. instead of 8, causing her to hear working-class voices during her meditation. Margaret eventually moved after her husband was transferred to another state, but not before trying to organize a neighborhood fundraiser to buy me a more suitable vehicle. The fundraiser raised exactly $0, and I still drive my Honda with pride. Sometimes I even park it directly in front of where her house used to be, just because I can.